starting our practice seminar soon. Actually, we have a lot of seats like in front. So if you don't mind, maybe we should move in front because it's a very casual settings. Yeah. So rather than sitting behind, maybe just move in front. Yeah. Okay. There's empty seats over here and over here as well. Thank you. Okay, we are almost ready. Yeah, actually. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting the practice seminar soon. Still waiting for more to come in, so maybe we'll start in a minute's time, okay? Give us 1 more minute. There are still empty seats in front, so perhaps you can actually come in like nearer. It's a very informal settings, yeah, so not to worry, yeah? Empty seats in front. Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining this session. First and foremost, I'm sure everyone knows about SINDA, but for those who are not familiar, it's one of the 4 self-help group in Singapore. So ethnic-based self-help group. So we look after the Indian community. So Singapore Indian Development Association, that's SINDA. So when you talk about the Indian community, the population that we have to cover is quite a lot, and it's nationwide. And not only that, it's across all demographic, regardless if you're, if you're a children, as you age, even your seniors. So across all the demographic from cradle to grave, as we call our services, our range of programs. So it's wide ranging, and it's nationwide, and we need all hands on deck to solve the problems and the challenges that we face as a community, as an Indian community, and also to uplift the community and to inspire the youngsters to achieve higher. So that's the mandate of SINDA in a nutshell. And when we talk about volunteers, they are an integral part of the organization, because when SINDA started, in 1991, we had a very small number of volunteers, about 20 odd volunteers. And later we grew that volunteer base into something somewhat more substantial. So if you look at by 1997, we had grew to about 200 volunteers, still not much, but during that time, it was one of the organizations which was attracting a lot of volunteers. And in order to develop, volunteer-run programs, etc., we set up a dedicated volunteer management department in 1998. So at that time, we realized that, we needed a bit more hands on deck, and we also needed to run programs and provide senior volunteers to share their experiences, to provide ground-up inputs. And that's when Volunteer Development Council, VDC as we call them, was set up in 2009. 2014, fast forward, VDC was reconstituted as a Volunteer Management Resource Panel, as an advisory panel on volunteer matters. And with the growth, what we saw was, more volunteers coming on board, about 1,000 over volunteers. And these are active volunteers, not the entire volunteer ecosystem. And we then decided to create what we call the VM pillar as a strategic pillar of the organization within the SINDA system. So volunteer management then evolved to, from a resource panel, then evolved to become what we call a subcommittee. So that's where we are in terms of the volunteer journey as an organization. But coming to your question, volunteers we feel are essential and integral part to the organization, because the number of staff that we have can only go about helping to solve, run programs, etc., and engage with so many people, which is not enough. We need to amplify the work, we need to amplify the efforts. So we decided from the onset that volunteers will form an integral part of that outreach, of that program, implementation and planning and execution as well. So in terms of where we stand on volunteers, I think they are a very much strategic pillar to our organization, and we value all volunteers, and we try to obviously make them not as a fly-by-night, but rather engage them, entrench them, and get them to be advocates for the organization. Yeah. Absolutely. So, very good question. Although we are, we primarily focus on the Indian community in Singapore, what we also have is a very interesting mix of demographic that we service. So, when you look at Indians, in the past when we have intermarriages, obviously the children or the descendants, they take the ethnicity of their father, but somewhat on IC it may say Indian, but they may actually be of other ethnic cultural traditions that they're from. So you have, as much as we have Indians who primarily speak Tamil as a language, but we also have Indians who speak Malay, Indians who speak other languages, sub-ethnic languages. We also have volunteers who are non-Indians, so your Chinese, your Malays, your Caucasians who come and volunteer, because these are corporate volunteers that we engage. So we engage corporates, and we do have something called the Indian Business Roundtable, IBR, within SINDA. So that's where we engage corporate leaders who are of Indian origin, who then would bring their corporate hat and the resources to support the community at large, to see if we can also engage them and their employees to volunteer with us in our programs to support other fellow Indians. But also as an extension of SINDA, even if other ethnic groups were to come and ask us for help, we don't turn them down. So we also engage and help them. So primarily, yes, focus on the Indian community, like CDAC is focused on Chinese community, Mendaki on the Malays, Eurasian Association on the Eurasian community. So SINDA is focused on the Indian community, but there's no wrong door policy. So if any of us come to us for help, we help them. And then while we wait for them to be triangulated to the necessary self-help group for them to follow up. Sure. No, very good question. And are you the first person to lead this task force or team? So congratulations. You know, when I first came to the room, I was looking at the sign-up sheet, you know, and I saw 3 MOH officers. Then I was asking, hey, what is MOH doing here? so now you answer my question. So having said that, I had some thoughts. While you were sharing, I had some thoughts. And my thoughts were as follows. During COVID-19, you had a lot of ground-up response. And this ground-up response essentially are made a response by volunteers. So you had that, Migrant Workers Coalition group. You had so many other non-profit organization, just group of people just coming together to do something to help this, people who are affected across the spectrum of society, elderlies, people without, food, who are out of job, who are, essentially migrant workers, etc. So across the spectrum, people came forward, and that was very heartening, right? So that's a trend that I thought was unprecedented. We haven't seen at that scale, and people willing to go out of the way to help others and look out for each other. So that's the first observation that I made. And after COVID-19, were there any efforts to engage them, to sort of attract them back, or to funnel them into different platforms or ways to get them back in? I didn't see that happening. But it's still there as loose groups here and there, but that was a consolidated effort where we saw people coming together across spectrum. And I know that for a fact because wearing my other hat, which they introduced, Rose of Peace, we led this initiative called SG United Buka Puasa Initiative. So during circuit breaker, we were feeding about 20,000 people every day. And this came about because of partnership with, obviously the ministry, private sector, with the people sector, etc. So we had about 9 partner organizations, mobilized a lot of volunteers into the hundreds of volunteers. And then after that, we were obviously benefiting people. And once circuit breaker was over, once COVID-19 was over, that's it. So there wasn't any concerted effort to go and get them back again. So you asked me, the volunteer list is still there, but what happens to it after that? Nothing happens. So where I'm coming from is, I think the function that you just described have to be embedded into every single organization in Singapore, across the spectrum. You should be present in all the self-help group. At least a core group of volunteers from the self-help group should be empowered with the know-how or the knowledge of disseminating the information should a pandemic break out in Singapore. Self-help group aside, I think the church communities were all very active. Bible Society is certainly active. New Hope is very active, Pastor Andrew. You have so many other religious organizations, like MUIS, for example, has about 70 over mosques around Singapore that they manage and they operate and they oversee. So religious organizations, under Taoist Federation, there were over a few hundred temples around Singapore. So the crisis preparedness that was set up by MCCY under CRED for the religious organization should be working with you closely. Self-help group should be working closely with you to train a core group of individuals who are able to relay what you have just shared or what you are doing and be trained and train the trainer model. And then these volunteers, I just mentioned only 2 groups. One is religious community and the other is self-help groups. But beyond that, the PA, the grassroots, the networks, the different networks, the MEAC, the IEAC, the youth network, the CCC, all the CCMC, all those entities have to be, the way I see it, have to be engaged at that level. And they should have at least 1 or 2 representatives who are part of your network, who can then disseminate, relay the information, who is able to tap and get you volunteers, the volunteers that you need. But obviously, when crisis hits, there'll be competing priorities. They'll be wearing multiple hats. But at least you have a foot in the door. And rather than building the network from scratch, you can already do so and tap on it. And if they can't be there themselves, they can send people to go there and to be participating in your engagements and efforts. But I think the main the main thing that I see in what you just described as what you're trying to build is clear lines of communication, because you can't be engaging these volunteers on a constant basis, because I can come to volunteer engagement and retention, it's very difficult. And yours is a very ad hoc black swan event that hits Singapore, and you have to mobilize volunteers rather than engagement of volunteers, rather than you can engage these individuals whom you have trained in these organizations all across Singapore. But for you to engage the larger pool of volunteers which they engage with on a sustained basis is going to take up so much time and resource, which I don't think, you don't know when the pandemic or when something bad is going to happen in that sense. So that's my 2 cents worth. Happy to have a deeper conversation if you see you're interested.
It's okay, it's okay. Can you hear me? Is it better? Is it better? Okay. So I think what Usha said is true, right? Because there's a lot of leverage out there. That means groups have done it. There's volunteer call. You just have to pull together the principles. What can be applicable? What that means is this, right? So first thing is you need to sort out the rationale of why you need to form this group of people. Why should they be there? Why should they be there? And because if you get the wrong whys, you get the wrong kind of people to volunteer for the wrong reasons. For example, you talk about the pioneer generation, getting them, you give them a little bit of incentive, but honestly, it's not sustainable, right? It must be more than the incentive, right? So that's one. I think you've got to sort out the rationale. Second thing is the rhythm. You need to sort out the rhythm. How often should they come? Do they come here once a year, or what was shared about Red Cross? You've got to figure out what is the right rhythm for any volunteers to come. Same thing from MOH perspective. What is the rhythm that is sufficient to make sure that they are always there? Then the third thing, of course, is that I always believe that there must be a ribbon moment. That means you need to find some way to celebrate those volunteers. You need to find some way to celebrate those volunteers. If not, are we taking them for granted? Sometimes I think some of us abuse our volunteers. I'll use the word that way, right? But I think we should find moments to celebrate with them with the ribbon moments, so that they are appreciated, so that they keep going, they keep the rhythm, they keep the rationale, and keep the whole cycle going.
Thank you. Yeah, like what they have shared, I think engagement is very important, because if you don't engage your volunteers, you're going to lose them. Yeah, so I don't know. So when you shared, what came to my mind was the election officers, which happens every 4 years. So they engage the teachers, right? So you, instead of like recreating one group, look into the existing volunteer groups and look at which is the group that you could actually tap into them. So I think the very first thing is, what's the JD of that role, these crisis centers that you were talking about? What is the roles aspect of them? It's not a general role where you just distribute goodie bags and all that, right? I mean, you require special skill sets required. So you need to have an idea what's the JD, what's the skill sets that's actually required. Then the second is, who's the best person, best groups, because you are now mobilizing numbers. So it's which is the best group that best fits. So it could be a collaboration of a few groups. And of course, now we even have the volunteer centers. There are 24 volunteer centers in Singapore. Whether volunteer centers could be the crisis backup plan, I'm not sure. Then of course, like what they mentioned, there's Red Cross, there's C2E, you know, there's First Aider, there's Total Defense. There's a lot of all these volunteer groups. So you could get a few of them to come together and collaborate and adopt them to become the, I think we have a Total Defense Day or something as well, right? So there are also all these groups that's around. So instead of recreating, look into some of these existing groups to adopt, to become that crisis as a backup plan. Yeah, then along the way, because you need that ongoing engagement and the training, right? What kind of skill sets is actually required for them, and you do need to maintain them. my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
One point to add to what you shared. Remember the positive word that we shared was partnership. So you might want to consider partnership. Means partners who wants to help you to be successful.
That's the word. So I have to identify that part.
Yes, yes.
It's a very niche area. I'm not sure who to reach out to.
A few. We need to
Maybe
get
Red Cross.
Yes, sir. Your question.
Not answering. Sorry, not asking question, but maybe.
future also.
People don't understand what color means, so instead, because nothing color animation they're reframing the preparedness levels so that it makes it clearer for the public, so we don't run open by Maggie and other people.
Okay, let's move on to going back to this volunteer topic. So the second question that we have for the panel, maybe again, generally needs of our organizations are different. So what would be the takeaway when someone volunteers with your organization? If let's say I'm a volunteer and I go volunteer with your organization, what would you think would be my takeaway?
So there are the few types of volunteers. So you have the ad hoc and you have the regular. So I presume you're referring to the ad hoc that is actually joining us for the first time.
Maybe for both, like
Okay. So for ad hoc like event volunteers, if they are joining us for the first time, so far the feedback they got was, and usually they are very new volunteers, because new volunteers they'll tend to do the more ad hoc ones, and they like everyone coming together. So the community spirit is actually one of the draws for people to volunteer, and it also gives them the confidence, and they will basically will want to take on more roles and more commitments going forward, because they must try it first. Yeah. So for the regular volunteers usually they will basically doing more of the at risk, working with more at risk seniors and all that. So they will see the needs lah. Right, so the needs are on the ground, so they see, they feel it, they see the importance of what they're doing, the purpose. I mean, of course, for the ad hoc volunteers, they also see the purpose of what they're doing, but they don't have such close interaction with the beneficiaries, where the regular volunteers, usually they will have a more in-depth engagement with the beneficiaries, the seniors.
So it's the emotional gratification.
Yes, definitely. I mean, they're not doing this for money. It's really doing it for the purpose, for the community. Yeah, and most importantly is they cannot feel that they are doing it alone, because if they are doing it alone, then they like, why do I want, So I think doing it together, the group effort is also very important. Yeah.
Have a award or a recognition system to recognize and award these volunteers on.
Currently now we just do it on a yearly basis, like how many years that they serve. But for volunteer leaders, we do give them the recognition for volunteer leaders as well. And because of COVID, we have also recognized volunteers who actually stepped forward during COVID. Yeah, but on the regular basis, it's just based on the term that they served, as well as the volunteer leaders, because volunteer leaders take on additional roles as compared to the regular volunteers.
No, very good question. For Sinda, it's very unique in the sense that we get a lot of youth who come and volunteer with us along the way, especially those who are beneficiaries of our scholarships, of our bursaries, of Sinda awards, etc. So many of them, they benefited from what the community gave them, and they have a sense of pride in being associated with the organization, and they want to come back at some point in future to give back, to pay it forward, to contribute back to the community. So we do have that pool. And we also have what we call the Sinda Youth Club. And in that youth club, essentially we engage students from the local IHL, Institute of Higher Learnings, across the board, poly, uni, ITEs, and so on. And they naturally transit into a larger ecosystem, the Sinda ecosystem, where they help us with our programs, with our volunteer efforts, etc. At some point, obviously, they will disengage because of life, they go on to work, they have family, etc. But later on, we've seen many come back as well to sort of continue on their efforts and journey. So what is it that we want them to take away is, first and foremost, is for them to connect with the organization, and so that they imbue in themselves a sense of belonging, a sense of value adding to the community, to uplifting life, to helping beneficiaries, etc. So I think that would allow them to reap the fruits of their labor, and that's something that we are focused on. Second, we make sure that when they volunteer with us, we also give them opportunities to empower themselves. So we have volunteer training, we have a volunteer framework, we send them for training, we make sure they're equipped with the right skill sets, and then they are able to progress from a volunteer to a volunteer leader in future, where they're able to then coach and mentor incoming batches of volunteers or new volunteers. So that ability to progress is something that we have as part of the framework, and that helps to drive that engagement with the volunteers. And last but not least, I think where we have arrived or made it is when these volunteers themselves become advocate for us and the work that we do and the organization that we represent. And many of them have also donated, contributed back financially, time, energy, and also bring their friends and family along to volunteer. And it becomes a culture where the parents volunteer, and then the children also come, and then they are part of that whole environment. So it has been a very heartening journey over the past many years, but I think there's a lot more to be done, because the amount of challenges that we are facing, we have to solve at the end of the day, it's a lot. So we need all hands on deck.
Sure. I talk about 3R, now I can talk about 3E. First E is really about exposure, right? Because sometimes you get volunteers who come in, they're not sure. You're also not sure, to be honest. So it's more as exposure. Next month, thanks to MOE, no me exams. So 350 students are coming to volunteer at New Hope. So to organize exposure to 350 students, that's the nature of the engagement. So you need to tailor that from an exposure standpoint. Secondly, that we always look at is really about experience. What kind of experience do you want the volunteers to have? That part you can create. What kind of experience do you want the volunteers to come in to have? So is this something that you would intentionally consider as part of your volunteering strategy? The third one is really more deeper EU, is actually engagement. How are you going to keep this engagement going? Why do they want to keep on going? We have a volunteer, we call Auntie Esther. She appeared in the video in the basketball court. If you saw her, right, with the curly hair. She's 83 years old. She has been serving, I can't remember, since 10 years ago, past decade. She's a volunteer. She's a senior. She does that without being asked. The question is why? Why is it so engaging for her that she will always come back to do the work she loves? Those things money cannot give. Neither money can buy. These are very genuine. So how do you continue to engage those volunteers who genuinely wants to make a difference to your organization?
We run a active aging center. Singapore is aging. 2030, 1/4 of us will be 65 years and above. There's a limit to how many foreign helper we can have at home, right? So, and there's a limit to how many staff we can hire at a active aging center as well. So our long-term plan is to make every senior a volunteer. Seniors helping seniors. So actually our volunteer is basically a senior helping another senior concept. So we are looking into, of course, preventive health. Seniors must be healthy. At the same time, equipping them with skill sets that they could actually help their neighbor. Yeah, so that's actually our plan for our center.
So speaking of volunteer, I'm a volunteer. I'm on the subcommittee. So obviously I did ask my staff the question, so what are we doing to in terms of longer term engagement for volunteers? So very fascinating work as a board that we came up with when we brainstormed the ideas is to move into skills-based volunteering. And what do I mean by skills-based volunteering? Meaning while volunteering remains an interest, area and interest, we assess the volunteer suitability for a particular role, and then whether the person possesses that particular skill sets or not. And if they don't, then we will train them. But otherwise, if they have a particular expertise, we don't pigeonhole them into any program. We make sure that program in which they're volunteering for is aligned to what they want to be doing and utilizing the skill sets for. So if they don't have any ready-made, tailor-made option, ready-made option available, we tailor-make that volunteering opportunity for them, and that's something that we are moving to. The second, we realized that traditional partnership between companies, non-profits, donation, volunteer, etc., it provides, it's beneficial, but it's very transactional. So instead, what we are looking to do is to make skills-based volunteering different, and it's a bit different because it helps you to knit together expertise and resource from corporates, non-profit sector, etc. So rather than looking at the individual, we look at what value they bring in and to see how we can tailor-make the volunteering experience suitable for them such that they enjoy the process and they bring their friends and family and they come back again and again. So the last one is really look at corporate volunteering, engage corporations like Microsoft, like Grab, like Tata Consulting Services, TCS, and they then come with their workforce to support some of the programs and efforts that we do at SINDA. So these are three things. And beyond this, for the volunteers, what we're also looking to do is to get our staff to go for data analytics, systems thinking, sort of training programs for the staff to better outreach to the volunteers, not just the volunteers, but for the larger SINDA ecosystem, so that we are able to communicate better, we're able to track better, we're able to map out better who our volunteers are and how we can further engage them, retain them, and all this we can get in a dashboard. So that's something that we're pivoting to.
So to add to what Sujin and what Asha has just shared, I think two considerations, right? Earlier, Haslinda talked about from PPIS, right? Talk about your time, talent, and treasures. Actually, a lot of times in volunteer work, right, we forgot about the tongue. Now that we got social media, we need the tongue to speak good of the volunteer work. A lot of times we forgot about the tongue or type or whatever. It's so important because that's why even the MC said, right, whatever generation you are, TikTok, Facebook, whatever, I think we need to put a tongue or type around it, because if not, people don't know. People don't know. And when people don't know, they go to the wrong places. So I think we can help to level that up. So we are looking into that and pushing that realm as well. The other area, of course, is, I agree with what Ursha said about skill space, right? We are in a knowledge economy. Once a volunteer comes with the kind of skill space that can level up the organizations and benefit the clients and beneficiaries, right, it's a plus plus. So you got to consider how and what the skill space that will help to level up the organization competencies in such a way that, especially with the volunteers base. Since the mic is with me, I start. I think, yeah. So when it's interest-based groups, the challenge is what is their common interest. So I think that interest commonality is very important to help you identify who are the volunteers you want to continue to keep it sustainable. I think that is important for especially for interest-based groups. Because I say this because I know another group, social service. I can't name the name. They all were very interest-based. They got volunteers in, but some of the volunteers came in common interest, but had a different idea. I mean, what it means is that they actually came in to become critic of what you are supposed to do. So that's why the interest-based, you got to have a commonality of why they should be there. If not, it creates more problems with the volunteers. I have to say this.
I mean, echoing collaboration, there are groups in Singapore. So have you heard of better.sg, better.sg? So look up better.sg. Is a group of technologists who help with the society and solve societal problems, etc. So to put another hat that I wear, I'm also the chairman of the Public Affairs Committee for SIFA, Singapore Indian Fine Arts Society. So we have about 2,000 students that learn classical Indian fine arts, and as an organization, they've always not harnessed technology. And recently, about 2-3 years ago, we had a new committee that came, and many of them are professionals, MNC, expertise that they brought to the organization. We really harness technology to see how we can engage, we can communicate, and we can also, get the youth to come back. Because we have a large alumni base, and is there a way to tap on them? That's one thing that we were focused on, and we managed to crack the code with tech, with comms, with technology and engagement. We were able to do that. For that, you need platforms to engage, and for you to kickstart, NTU has also got a social interest group which helps with non-profit organization and so on. There's conjunct consulting with some of the universities that they have youth groups which they help non-profit organization on. So there are enough of these groups around. I think, as he mentioned, collaboration is the key. Reach out to some of them, or even corporates which resonate with the kind of work that you do, to ask them if they can help you to build a website, help you to do media engagements, etc., to amplify the work that you do to attract them.
Is your charity an IPC? If your charity is an IPC, NCSS currently fund volunteer manager for just 1 or 2 years, so you can tap into the the grant. I mean, you can explore with that. Yeah, but you're right to say that technology will basically help to improve your productivity and a bigger reach, but you still need a human touch and that engagement. Yeah, so for us, is volunteer leaders plays a very important role. So the volunteer leaders actually does that engagement for us. But I think like what they have also mentioned, I think your cause, who you're trying to serve, is actually very important, because otherwise you'll be dragged all over the place. But what is the cause that you're actually trying to serve? Thank you.
Okay, good evening everyone. Let's start the practice seminar for today. So welcome to practice seminar 1, integrating volunteers in your organizations. So I'm your facilitator here. I'm Jeffrey from Samaritans of Singapore, SOS. We are a suicide prevention agency. Not suicide agency, but suicide prevention agency, okay? I know some of my staff always say suicide agency. No, it's suicide prevention agency, okay? So together with me, I have Boon Kiang over here. Boon Kiang from Satacom's Health. He's the head of the strategic partnerships and branding, who will be facilitating this session as well. So today we'll be discussing about how we can strengthen the partnership between staff, team, and volunteers towards a more volunteer-driven initiatives. So with that, it's our honor to have invited 3 prestigious speakers over here to share with all of us their thoughts and experience. So first of all, we have Ms. Xiu Chin over here. So I'll give a round of applause to Ms. Xiu Chin. So Ms. Xiu Chin over here is a CEO from Blossom Seeds. So Blossom Seeds is a social service agency that focuses on promoting well-being for the seniors. Yeah. She actually has more than 17 years of experience as an accountant, as well as Xiu Chin is very heavily involved in community work. So I think she has more than 8 years of experience volunteering in hospice care. Yeah. So next up, we have Mr. Shah over here. So Mr. Shah is the Vice President of the Volunteer Management Subcommittees of SINDA. Yeah. So apart from that, Mr. Shah is also the founders of the interfaith non-profit organization, which is called Roses of Peace, which strives to build a harmonious and resilient Singapore. Because of his contributions, Mr. Shah is also the recipient of the President's Volunteerism and Philanthropy Awards in 2018. Should we give a round of applause to Mr. Shah? Okay, so on the third speakers, so is Mr. Kevin Lee. So Mr. Kevin is a seasoned business and strategic management leader, more than 25 years of experience in business growth as well as transformation strategies across commercial enterprise as well as non-profit sector. So today he is representing New Hope. Okay. So apart from that, Mr. Kevin is also a member of with the Singapore Institute of Directors. So let's welcome Mr. Kevin over here. So okay, welcome speakers. Today, before we go into our conversation, right? Just some ground rules. First of all, maybe keep your handphone in silence. Okay, that's one. Second, it's very informal settings. Feel free to ask any questions. So ask whatever you feel comfortable. After that, the speakers will answer whatever they feel comfortable with. Okay, very informal settings. But before we go into the conversation, right? Actually, I have 2 questions to ask all of you. Okay, just out of curiosity, because right now we're talking about volunteer integrations. Just now I also asked the group so want to find out from you, right? First, what is one positive thought you have, when you talk about working with volunteers? Okay, let me just go to the next one. Yeah. So what is one positive thought you have when it comes to volunteer collaborations? Scans the QR code, or otherwise you can log in slido.com and key in the number, the code. So give me one word answer, because we just want to find out what is the main pull factor for you to include volunteers in your core work. Yeah, so share with us one positive thought you have when it comes to collaborating with volunteers, okay? Robust outcomes, inclusion, okay, interesting. Positivity. Wow, powerful, why? I'm curious. Any more? I'm just curious about the powerful. Whoever write this, I'm going to ask you questions. Yeah. Impact, interconnected. Okay, shared ownership. Okay, I like this, shared ownership. Any more? Okay, impact, yeah. Can. Okay, actually, who input powerful? I'm just curious. Oh, okay. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about powerful.
I think maybe the other better word to use is impact. Why I use powerful is because I think when volunteers with their skill profession or what they know can come in to partner with the organization's needs, for lack of better description, it's very powerful because that's where we can marry both things together, both groups of people, and then to be able to serve our clients.
I see.
That's the word powerful.
I see. At times, volunteers can really create a very powerful and positive impact to the core work.
For me, I personally see that volunteers
Mm.
social services that are served here. So without them, we need them to do so much more.
I see. Thank you so much for your sharing. May I know which organization you're from?
I'm from
Focus on the Family. And your name?
Joy.
Joy. Okay. Thank you so much for your sharing, Joy. Of course, when we talk about positive impact, right, we will have challenges as well. So these are the challenges that the previous group has wrote down. Just wondering for your case, perhaps you can share with us one challenge that you foresee on working with volunteers. Yeah, one word answer. What kind of challenges that you foresee? Scan the QR code. Okay, can input one word answer. I mean, you can, if let's say the response over here actually is very inclined to your thoughts, right, you can actually add in as well. You can key in the same responses, yeah. Alignment, okay. I can see the font getting bigger. Retention. Alignment as well. Whether alignment to the cause of the agencies or alignment to the volunteering role. So commitment, okay. Whether the volunteers are committed. Let's give another few seconds. Expectations, volunteers' expectation as well as staff expectation towards volunteers. Yeah. Okay, any more? Scheduling, I saw recruitment. Okay, 5 more seconds. Engaging them meaningfully, interesting. Okay, Ken. So it seems that commitment is still one of the main challenge that all of us foresee when we talk about integrating volunteers in our organizations. So let's see if we can cover these particular questions in our conversations later, okay? So with that, allow me to pass the time to Boon Kiang over here, who will facilitate the Q&A, yeah? Boon Kiang, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me pass the microphone to the speakers.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm from Blossom Seeds. I was one of the founding volunteers. So I volunteered for 5 years and I stepped down and became a staff for 5 years. Yeah, so we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year. So when we first started was basically going around, working with seniors who are isolated with very little support and require like medical escort and all. So it was already a lot of volunteers who were applying leave and took leave from work. To bring them for all the medical appointments, and as the numbers grow, some of the volunteers join as staff to do all the coordination. Yeah, so most of our programs are all supported by the volunteers. The staff basically do a lot of the volunteer coordination, doing all the scheduling and more of the case management work. But the befriending and the escorts and all that were actually all done by the volunteers. Yeah, so volunteers plays a very important role in our organization. Integrated. So how do we integrate them? So we meet up with them very regularly, and the volunteers actually go through training as well. So we also had a series of training to make sure that actually there's no, in fact, the conversation we had with the volunteers is that they are as important as the staff, and we also train them in what we train the staff. Of course, the staff would have higher skill sets, okay, but we also train the volunteers in certain areas, and we meet up with the volunteers very regularly, just like we meet up with the staff very regularly. So actually, we also so the volunteer engagement is also fairly regular as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I represent an organization called SINDA, Singapore Indian Development Association. It's a self-help group that's focused on uplifting the Indian community in Singapore. As a self-help group, obviously our mandate is nationwide, so the entire Indian community in Singapore, along the lines of CDAC looking after the Chinese, Mendaki the Malays, and EA, Eurasian Association looking after the Eurasian community. So we have a limited number of staff. We don't have that many staff. And we also have a limitation on the number of staff that we can have as a self-help group. So in that sense, given the vast coverage that we have, the mandate that we have, we rely heavily on volunteers. So as I shared in the previous session, we started out with 20 volunteers in 1991, and we've grown steadily to have about 1,000 active volunteers. It's a lot more than 1,000, but we have 1,000 active. And as and when we need, we can always search the number up. So as a function, it became a strategic function in 2014, where we pivoted from a resource panel and we sort of established what we call a resource panel for volunteer management. And more recently, last year, it became a volunteer management subcommittee, which is a higher level. And the idea of a subcommittee is we draw expertise individuals from corporate sector, from private sector, people sector. We get them to advise us on a volunteer management strategy. So I'm the vice chair for that subcommittee. And then we also ensure that they work in tandem with the staff who are overseeing the volunteer management function at SINDA. So we have about 5 staff who are part of the volunteer management committee. And these 5 staff, primarily their role is to, when I say integrate, first is to get the buy-in from the larger, SINDA staff body. So the staff first have to identify and recognize that volunteers form an integral part of the outreach efforts to the success of the programs and the activities of the organization. So once the staff buy-in is there, then we have to make sure we create the right culture for the volunteers to come and volunteer with us as an organization. So a culture which is empowering, a culture which is helping them to take on responsibility, a culture which helps them to rise through the ranks from just a volunteer to a volunteer leader, who then be able to coach and mentor incoming batches of volunteers. And not only that, we want to make sure that we recognize, as mentioned by Swee Chin, these volunteers. So we have regular engagements, team bonding activities, Makan sessions. We also have yearly awards that we give to our volunteers. So these are ways in which we recognize, we get them on board, we help them to play an integral role in achieving the objective of the organization. Thank you.
Okay, so for New Hope's case, we are very intentional because the numbers grew over the last 3 years because of COVID. New Hope didn't have COVID in the strat plan at all. So pandemic was out of the picture, the language was not there, so staff went up, volunteers went up. When it goes up, then you have to be careful how to do the integration, meaning to say that we have now come to a point where we have a qualification form that all volunteers need to fill in. Why? Because, for the simple reason, why? Because we want to start with why. We want to know why you are here, so we can serve one another that way better, so that they don't come with a different agenda, ideas, or whatever. So that's important. The other thing, of course, is I think for those of you who have stayed since the morning, right, it was very clear from the national leaders that 22% at the national level for volunteerism is still too low. They want to up the number. So you need to look at integration now. If the number goes up, we have more volunteers coming to your organization, it's good to start thinking about integration at this point and what will work for you in your respective organization.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone at this point? No? Okay. Any questions from the floor? No? Okay, then we'll start with
Can I ask something?
yeah.
I was just wondering, because I'm from HCA Hospice classes. So one of the key focuses we restructure our volunteer management was to better engage and retain volunteers and to really
since I have the mic. So the qualification is important for volunteers because if you don't qualify your volunteers coming in, right, you will crash in some form of shape. So that's one. Part of the qualification also why I suggested, I think that works for New Hope, is that the staff understand why they are here. It's not something that assumption is or presumption, but it's a clear commitment that they are there because of this. Because volunteers sometimes come in for one time because they don't know what they want. They're just throwing their names all over the place. So it's exploratory. But the key thing for us to understand I think Rasha talked about it as well, it has to be elevated to a strategic interest in such a way that it's sustainable. So I think the earlier you're at the front to qualify it, to make sure they are here for the right reasons, together with the staff, is number one. That got to be sorted out. If not, there's always lingering. Actually, Jeff got more examples to share because he's organizing a lot of volunteers. They can run the whole shop with, overrun the shop. So I leave it to him whenever you want to share.
Thanks a lot. Very good question. For SINDA, it's always been, volunteers have always been the front and center of the organization, more than 3 decades. So it's always been the culture of such that we are welcoming. I think what's important is for the staff to understand that at the highest level, the buy-in and the mandate for volunteerism comes from the organization leadership team. So there's always been something that we're very conscious of. And ongoing engagement with staff to address concerns on the ground, because sometimes volunteers, they don't show up, volunteers, they may do something which we need to remedy as an organization, etc. So in those instances, that feedback loop is very, very important for them to be able to speak frankly, etc. Then the other thing is, so far we haven't had the scenario where the staff feel threatened by the volunteers. So, I mean, it's a good thing to have because the staff are really overstretched, and whatever help that they can get, if they can, empower the volunteers to run the show, if they can empower them to train train other volunteers as we have done for volunteer leaders, etc. So that really helps to alleviate some burden off the shoulder. So that's been SINDA's journey. But I think what's important is also to have quarterly, biannual, annual updates to be provided to the leadership, to the board, to the senior management, and also to the beneficiaries, such that they see how the volunteers are contributing, and they see the importance that they have and the important role that they play in the organization and in the activities and programs. Yeah. Thank you.
Number one, I open up my accounts and I show them how many staff can I hire. All right, so I think everyone is aware. And number two is in our KPI. Okay, so the number of volunteers that they have to engage is actually inside their KPI. So for every program, everyone is expected to at least support and manage a certain number of volunteers, and of course the feedback from the volunteers is also part of the staff KPI. I think more importantly is the staff understands that it's a charity sector and there's only a limit. There's so much to do and there's so little that they could do individually. And number three is actually our values. One of our values is teamwork. So when we talk about teamwork, we say that it's not just teamwork within the organization, but it's also the community. And we demonstrated that through a lot of collaborations with a lot of partnership with a lot of our partners. So they see for themselves that teamwork is happening inter-organization, and it's actually very important that we also involve the community to support us in the work that we do. Yeah, so these are some of the things that we do.
Generally, the demarcation between the staff and maybe a volunteer is there is a certain line drawn. For example, when you're dealing with the beneficiary, there's always this PDPA concern. You can't entrust too much personal data to a volunteer because the person is not employed. Compliance and audit also you may is a grey area. Okay, let's since we are on this topic, then can I also, is there any questions further from this? If not, then I'll move on to the next question for the panel. So the next question to the panel is, how then do you create a robust culture to ensure that the staff, the operation staff, and the volunteer, can work together to meet your objective? Suchin, you want to start first?
So basically, this is our corporate T-shirt. All the staff and the volunteers wear the same T-shirt. So when we are actually out there, nobody can tell who's the staff and who's the volunteer. So there's no differentiation. I'm not sure whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but this is actually what's happening, right? So there's no differentiation. And in terms of the volunteers, so we do the volunteers. Also, so of course we have regular volunteers and volunteer leaders, and certain regular volunteers. So they attend training, some of the trainings that the staff goes through as well, right? So the skill sets in terms of empowering the team with the skill sets, actually we also do a lot of training for the volunteers, yeah. So and regular get together. So every staff has a group of volunteers that they work with, yeah, and they know that they are this team of volunteers are actually supporting them with the program that they run. And it's just one staff, but then you have maybe 50 volunteers. So it's the team of them that is actually supporting some of the work that they do. So that's the culture that we have. So every staff recognize that the volunteers plays a very important role in supporting the beneficiaries that we serve. Yeah.
For SINDA at least, what we've come to realize is, all the staff, at one point in time, they were volunteers. Many of them are volunteer for SINDA at one point in time. So they came through the ranks, they sort of volunteered, and then they finally, at some point in their life, different career path, they landed at SINDA. And then even after having left SINDA, they come back and volunteer with us. So that's always a happy problem. It's just a virtuous cycle. But what's also interesting is, as I shared earlier, is many of our beneficiaries, they also come back to volunteer with us. So be it scholarship, bursary, or be it one of the tuition programs, or care packs which they receive at some point in their life, they then pay it forward. Once they've done well for themselves, they want to give back either their time or energy, or even better with monetary contribution. So that's what they've done. And I think having seen that, the staff themselves realize the kind of plus points that the volunteers bring, and then they would like to embrace them and to keep them with them. Having said that, what's also important for us is to recognize these volunteers. So I think what we have done is two things over the past 2 years, which is coming up with a volunteer framework model for us to train the volunteers to make sure that we're able to identify leaders who can lead and give them the right skill sets to do so, and then get them to lead the programs and place the responsibility on themselves to deliver the programs itself. And that is something that we have piloted, we have tried, it has worked, and I think we are going to just amplify that further. Second is volunteers themselves are good amplifiers of the good work that we're doing. So if we can get them to share with their friends, their families, put in the social media, etc., the good work they're doing, then that attracts even more people to come forward to engage us and to volunteer with us. But that also comes because we are a self-help group. We have that sort of base resource level for us to go and do this sort of next tier work. But good and bad, because the expectation is always more. So we are always thinking of ways in which how can we do things in a very innovative manner, how can we do things out of the box, etc. So that places pressure on the staff as well. Last but not least, we have increasingly been pivoting towards a more tech-led approach. So database analytics, having a dashboard to see who have volunteered with us for more than one engagements, how many hours, how many opportunities have they engaged with us on. And that's important because then that helps us to recognize them at the end of the year. And not only that, we see where we fall in terms of areas that we can improve, and then that gives us the data, the numbers to back it up. Yeah, thanks.
I will look at it from three perspectives. First consideration, to your point earlier, right? As an organization, you need to reconcile whether volunteers are partners or volunteers are competitors. So I think getting that clear in the culture sets the tone. Of course, Blossom C says use KPI measurements. But the thing is that it has to be relevant to the organizations where you are. So I think that question is important. Why are they there? Because, which leads to the second consideration, right? How do you celebrate success with your volunteers? We always need to look at, because can the organization be successes without? I think today, the morning question did surface, right? You can't have organization without volunteers today, and that's a given. The second question is, how do you frame it together, build a successful journey together such a way that, that's what Isha shared, right? They'll come back, and they'll come back with plus, 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 and that's a given. Then the question is that if you want that to happen, the third consideration will be, right, how do you keep it in a progressive manner? That means to say that, how can you sustain the volunteers to come back and come back and come back again? So that kind of sustainability is really important, because if not, I don't know, the volunteer managers here will be very tired, because burnout, no? One batch comes in, it goes out, and then next batch comes in again. There's no sustainability. Then it goes back to the earlier consideration, right? Why do we start with them? What's the success you're looking at? How do you keep sustaining that? So I think that will be three considerations they can put together. I think New Hope look at that. We are taking up the challenge. I shared with the earlier group as well. We didn't expect that to up the tempo means for New Hope, right? Because MOE, thanks to MOE, right? No more mid-year exams, right? One whole school is coming to volunteer, 350 of them. So they have never handled 350 students from that profile. So they're trying. They're trying. Okay, since the mic passed back to me, I would say this, which I also share with the group. Haslinda from PPIS shared that about time, talent, and treasures. The volunteers, one of the good things they talk about is tongue. They should be talking good things about what the organization is doing. That volunteers should be the best tongue, other than the time, talent, and treasures. Because when the best tongue happens, right, you're quite assured that the time, talent, and treasures will follow, because they're talking good about you. Of course, I also learned the next T, right? Rasha just taught me just now, type. Social media, they can type about good things, not just tongue, right? Now they can type. So social media today, whatever, Facebook, TikTok, video, use it, because it helps. Yes. Tell, yes. Now I learned so much T from Rasha. I think we should go together next time. So I think watch that, because all these are stories they tell. It cannot come from organization, but when your volunteers tell the stories, right, with tongue, with the typing, it just boosts the effort. It makes the stewardship much clearer.
Actually, we have at SINDA we have another problem. The problem is that volunteers do a tremendous amount of work, but we don't showcase that to the larger ecosystem, the larger stakeholder networks that we have. So many of them, they sometimes come and ask, so what are your volunteers doing? Then we are scrambling to find stories, when in fact there are plenty of stories. So what we realized was to amplify what is also key. We have to amplify first the stories of our volunteers and the role that they've played over the many years in different programs, etc., as volunteer leaders at different stages. Second is to also amplify the good work that our volunteer management team is playing. So what do I mean by that? At SINDA, we know what they do. But outside in the volunteer management ecosystem, like NCSS ecosystem, in different ecosystem, we get them to go and share what SINDA is doing, how they're doing, learn best practices, and share best practices and so on. So that's something that we are consciously trying to do. The comms part was lacking for some time. I think that's something that we are wrapping up. And this year in August, we are having our first ever volunteer management conference for SINDA, and as part of that, the larger Indian ecosystem in Singapore. Yeah.
Appreciation and acknowledgement, the recognition. I think that is very, very important, and it has to be ongoing. Very, very little things that they do. Yeah. So, I mean, we are a very small team. We are a very small charity. So every good thing that our volunteers do, we actually will share. Yeah. So we constantly share. We constantly appreciate, acknowledge. Then of course there's always the formal event where you have your volunteer appreciation. Yeah, and even for volunteer leaders, they also participate in our staff event as well, because the volunteer leaders are actually playing very important roles which actually should be undertaken by staff, but actually it's the volunteer leaders who are doing it. So there are different types of different platforms of recognition and acknowledgement, appreciation at the end of the day of whatever that they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. It's okay. It's okay. I guess at the end of the day, also from because before SATA I was with Singapore Children's Society and I was there for 30 years as the fundraising director. One of the things that I realized with volunteers is that if my donors are also my volunteers, usually they don't drop out so fast. They're more entrenched with the organization. Because we have like back in Children's Society we have about 200,000 volunteer donors, about 20,000 is corporate, about 80,000 thereabouts is individuals. And every year we have about 22,000 transactions. I mean 22,000 unique people will donate to the society. So I track that using that donor base with the volunteer base, and I see some cross. So those I will see that they actually follow me through the years longer as compared to the ad hoc ones. Because donors that sometimes will just give you one time. So your donors, your volunteers, the same person, you got it lah. I mean you can have two database and then you can merge it and you see where is the similarity is. Yeah, you can actually do that when you merge. Okay, let's move on to the next question. But before that, is there any question to the floor?
Yeah, because we have a record of time and 5 more minutes, so any interesting question would you like to ask the panelists?
It's basically not just, it's not one way, it's for us to learn from each other. Because we all come from different organizations, right? And our organizations do things all differently. So it's just to exchange ideas. Any questions?
So for the homebound, I mean like for the homebound programs, for example, the befriending is still not too bad, because the befriendings, the befrienders, so you have like 3 volunteers going out together to visit 3 seniors, right? So there is a community that they don't feel so alone when they're doing it, right? But for programs like Medical Escort, it's a very lonely program. I go on my own and pick up the senior, I send them for medical appointment and bring them back, and nobody knows what happens, during the day, and it's very lonely, right? So so it's very important to pull them back, and everyone comes together and get them to share. And sometimes they also need a platform for them to share about some of the challenges they may have with the seniors and all. They have nobody to talk to, right? So we do meet them for different platforms at least once a month, right? And then of course they have an option whether they want to come for the get together or not, right? But we pitch it as training and also to update them about information. Yeah, so but we do see them at least once a month. And of course at the center it's even easier, because the center seniors and the volunteers, they come more regularly. Yeah. Yes. Also depend on the profile of the seniors lah. I mean, because we are working with senior volunteers, so they do require a little bit more hand holding as well. Yeah.
Okay, do we have enough time?
Yes, we do have 3 more minutes. And one more question.
Anyone? Okay, then maybe we'll just wrap up with the final questions for the panel. It's the same question as the previous group, is that moving forward for the future, what are your long-term plans? Your own, based on your own organization's volunteer or long-term plans? Sushi, do you want to start first?
It's okay. So we run an active aging center. So I was sharing that, in 2030, 1/4 is going to be 65 years and above. So there's really a limit to how many, caregivers or like foreign helpers and all that we could actually hire. So actually it's very important for the seniors to help seniors. So we are looking at, number one, of course, they must be healthy, and on top of that they must be equipped with the skill sets. So we are looking at a senior helping senior concept, where we could actually equip every senior to become a volunteer to help their neighbors. Yeah.
Thank you. So for SINDA, we are looking at skills-based volunteering. How do you move towards skills-based volunteering is one. The second is how do you then tailor-make the volunteering opportunity for that volunteer? So if you are good at something, if you want to contribute towards a particular cause, but we don't have that opportunity for you, is there a way that we can carve out that role for you, amongst all our programs that we have? So that's something that we're looking at. So that is to make sure that the friction is less when in the volunteering journey, and also they find meaning and purpose, and they put to use what they know, what they have learned, etc. The third is corporate volunteering. So how do we engage corporates? So we've got Microsoft, Grab, Tata Consultancy Services, coming forward to volunteer with us in major engagements, but can we do that in a more sustained basis for our other programs? The last one is, so that's on the volunteer side. The last is more on the staff side. How can we get our staff to be more tech-oriented, to track the volunteers, to see how many volunteers volunteer, what is the hours, which engagement works, which engagement may not work, how can we tweak it, what are the best practices we can decipher from the numbers that we have on the dashboard. And last but not least is micro-volunteering, right? So even if the volunteer doesn't have much time to engage, if there's once a year, 1 hour, 2 hour, the person is willing to give, it's okay, just get them in. Then we figure out how to work them up the ladder to see if they can allocate more time later on in their lives. Yeah.
So for New Hope, 3 strategic considerations. One is that we are looking at the new services, right? So when we look at the new services, we do a volunteer-first strategy. That means we find a volunteer that can help pivot the strategy of these new services. It's not a staff. We don't hire people to pivot the service. We hire volunteers. We hire volunteers free to pivot the services, because that helps the learning journey, also build out the volunteering strategy, because we know who we are looking for. That's one. Second area, I think what Ursha said about skills-based. So we are very intentional now. When we look at volunteers, we are very targeted, because now we have a VM, we have a small mini VMS as well. So, but it's to help to look at specific skill sets where it can level up the organization or be a blessing to the beneficiary or clients. So that's the intentional. The third thing is, of course, is I think a lot of us forget. I think I just pick up from what Ursha said. I think the reporting mechanism got to make sense, other than just beside the KPI. I think there got to be some way, at least for now, for New Hope, right? Every time we have board meeting, we have a section on volunteers. So we know the metrics, so we can see the shift, what the needs are, so that we can know where to help, where to lean in as well. So I think that's also one consideration that New Hope has taken.